Bottom line, everyone in 346 Derby Avenue was a fucking creep. Everybody in that house gave me bad feelings. In fact, I have never been more uncomfortable in my entire life than when I stayed at that house from April to December of 2013. I knew something wasn't right with the people who lived in that house, and I could feel it every day. So when I wasn't looking for work, I busied myself with exercise and art and stayed away from that place as much as possible. Now, there are two incidents concerning Rob that I want to document. The first story I heard secondhand from Laurice and Lynn when I returned from visiting my family in New Hampshire. So I get back from New Hampshire, and Rob's not there, and I hear from Laurice and Lynn that he has been arrested. They had a fire pit in the backyard, and Laurice said that Rob decided to burn all the firewood at once, creating this huge bonfire that Laurice says made her nervous that the house was going to catch on fire. When Rob runs out of firewood, he begins burning the wooden chairs that we had in our apartment. Laurice said that Rob was drunk, of course, and he wouldn't stop burning shit, so she had to call the cops and he was arrested. So when Rob gets out of jail a day or two later, the landlord, Ansonia cop Joe Jackson, has no problem letting Rob back into our apartment house. So let me ask all of you, if you were a local cop who owned an apartment house where you had a tenant that all the other tenants complained about, saying this guy's a drunk and blasts his stereo, disturbing people at night, then one night he gets so drunk he starts a huge bonfire in the backyard, that your property manager is quoted as saying she is afraid that the house is going to catch fire. Then he also begins to burn your personal property, consisting of your wooden furniture. So then your property manager has to call the Derby cops who arrest this drunk. Would you really let him stay at your house after all of that? Is his $150 a week really worth losing your apartment house to a fire and embarrassing you with all the local cops and all that? So my question is, when would Joe Jackson consider kicking Rob out, if not for all of that? So I think the relationship between these two is strange. Then the next incident concerning Rob happens at the end of August or the beginning of September 2013. Rob gets into an accident with his moped. He was driving around on this moped because he said he lost his driver's license to drinking and driving, so he couldn't operate a car. So I think the first thing I hear is that Laurice or Lynn mentions that Rob has been arrested because he got in an accident with his moped while drinking. So I don't see him around for a couple of days, and then a police officer shows up at the apartment asking if Rob Mailet lives there, and I said he does. Then the cop wanted to know if I knew who Rob's next of kin was, to notify them that Rob has been in an accident and is staying at the New Haven hospital. I say I don't know his family, but I could take a look around the apartment and see if I could find anyone's phone number written down, and I'll call them and let them know. The cop leaves, and I find Rob's cell phone, and I get a hold of his daughter, and I ask to talk to her mother, and I tell her what the cop said. And to make a long story short, about a month later, Rob gets out of the hospital, and his right arm is just about paralyzed. He could barely move it. He tells me that he almost died in the accident and that a priest had to perform last rites. He also says one more thing, and this sounded strange to me. Rob said that a cop had spoken to him at some point, I'm guessing when he was at the hospital, and the cop said that the accident was witnessed by another cop. And the cop who just happened to be there to witness Rob's accident said that Rob was on his moped. He swerved out of control, he hit a stop sign, and rode up the side of the stop sign like he was on a slide. So I told Rob I thought this was strange that a cop had witnessed his accident. Anyway, after his accident, I tried to help Rob a little more. I told him he could eat whatever food I had in the house because he no longer had a job and didn't have food stamps or anything. I also gave him a ride to the grocery store, to a food bank, and to a couple of appointments he had. So Rob quit drinking but was taking a lot of pain meds, but when he was sober, Rob was easier to get along with, and I began to talk to him a little more. Around November of 2013, the people upstairs would begin stamping their feet above my room, and it got worse and worse. Around 9 or 10 at night, when I'd try to go to sleep, they'd begin stomping above my room. It got worse and worse, and it seemed to be deliberate in that it went on for hours and hours and often until early in the morning. I don't know who was doing it, but I guess possibly everyone in the house. Sometimes even Rob would go upstairs to visit his buddy Vinny, and then the stomping would begin. One night, the stomping began when Rob was in his room, and when I hit the ceiling back, Larice called the police, and 3 officers from the Derby Police Department showed up, and also Joe Jackson from the Ansonia Police Department, the landlord, and they gave me a warning when I explained that someone upstairs had been deliberately stomping above my room for days, and when I knocked back on the ceiling, they ran to call the cops, so they were acting very manipulating and conniving. A side note is right above the room where I stayed at was the kitchen up there, so it could be anybody. They continued stomping above my room through December, and right before I vacated those premises, somebody wanted to make it very clear that my room was being entered when I wasn't home. Even though I'd make sure to lock the door whenever I'd leave, when I'd get home, the door was wide open and the light was on. Now I knew that Vinny used to stay in my room before he moved upstairs, so Vinny quite possibly still had the key, and Larice, as the property manager, definitely had all the keys to the house. In any regard, money was stolen and my camera was smashed on the floor. Then one night someone came and spray painted the word snakes across the front door of the house. The people upstairs called landlord Ansonia cop Joe Jackson to come down. And that morning Joe knocked on our door, which was a side entrance, and I saw Rob open the front door, and without a word, Joe enters the apartment and marches Rob down the hall into the bathroom where Rob goes in and closes the door behind him. It looked like Rob was scared and that Joe Jackson was used to controlling or handling Rob in such a way. Being the landlord, Joe didn't knock on the door and then ask if he could come in. Instead, when Rob answers the door, Joe stomps right in and marches Rob down the hall, and Rob runs into the bathroom and shuts the door. When Joe gets around the corner to where I was standing, he says, "Hey, someone spray painted snakes across the front door." And I responded with, "What do you want me to do about it?" He said, "Nothing. I just wanted to know if you knew anything." I said, "No, this is the first time I heard about it. I just woke up." He said, "All right," and then left. I believe December 17th or 18th of 2013 was the last time I saw Joe Jackson. I had gone down to the local grocery store with Rob to pick up some food, and Joe Jackson was standing outside the store ringing a bell with a Salvation Army bucket, trying to get donations. So when Joe sees me, he waves me over because I hadn't paid the rent in a week or two, because I didn't have the money, but I had been doing work around the place, like shoveling snow whenever it snowed. Joe wanted to know where the rent money was, and I said as soon as I got some money, I'll give him a call, and at that point, Rob walked out of the store. Now, sitting in a parked car a few feet from where Joe Jackson collected donations was an older black man. He wore a black baseball hat with the Freemasons insignia on it and had a camera, and he took a photograph of me, Rob, and Joe standing in front of that store. This is the individual I saw wearing the Freemasons hat taking a picture of us. I left 346 Derby Avenue abruptly on December 23rd, 2013.